Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Oluwole Ajayi, and I'm a student at studying for international development at Clark University. And I'm glad to take part in this year's National Public Health Week, which with the theme centering and celebrating culture, in health. And this afternoon I'll be presenting on the topic I call effects of climate change on the culture and health of rural African Americans. The effect of climate change on the culture and health of rural African Americans. You would agree with me that the effect of climate change today is really devastating, and it has affected, or it is affecting quite a number of people and a number of communities. But specifically, for the purpose of this presentation, I'll be focusing on rural African Americans, who I will be speaking majorly, concerning how they have really been affected, both their health and also their cultural heritage, how it has been affected by climate change. And moving on, I'll be talking about, the first thing I would like to mention is to talk about the statistics, the population of African American in the United States. African American makes up approximately 8% of the rural population in the United States, according to the United States Department of Agriculture. Now, this makes them the second largest minority group in rural and small town areas. This makes them the second largest, minority group in the United States, because they constitute, quite a large percentage in the United States. And in terms of economic value, the African Americans, are the second largest ethnic group in the United States that contributes to the United States economy after the white population. From the statistics I gathered there, I discovered that whites contribute 76.2% to the economy of the United States, which amounts to, or totals to, $13.2 trillion US, while the Black community, the African American, contributes 13.4% to the economy of the United States, which totals to $1.4 trillion. This in effect shows that the African American population, they are actually contributing to the economy of the United States, and they are they've been part of the history of the United States for years, for quite a number of years. And then I decided to delve further to check for convincing statistics, to check for figures, things that will validate this lecture. And then I stumbled upon the review by the United States Environmental Protection Agency. And then the most recent review of EPA shows that the health effects of particle pollution concluded that non-white populations, especially Blacks, faced higher risk from particle pollution. So, particle pollution has really is one of the bane of the Black population of African Americans, especially those living in rural America. It has really had devastating and debilitating effects on their health. And there are quite a number of examples that I can share with us, for the purpose of this lecture. A good example is the sugar industry in Pahokee, Florida, a community of 56% African Americans and 29% Hispanic, where Lake Okeechobee was polluted, putting the lives and the fish safety of these people, of these African Americans, in jeopardy. Another very good example I would like to share is the paper mill industry in Africatown, Alabama, and also Uniontown, in Alabama, where coal ash companies, has really polluted the environment of people living in these communities. And there's one of the quotes that I cherish, which I would like to share for the purpose of this presentation, is that of Dr. Bevel Wright, the Chief Executive Officer of the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice at Dillard University. He says, if you're a person of color, particularly Black or Latino, you are more likely to live near toxic facilities. And there is so much to say around this, you can see from this figure here that people of color bear greater air pollution burden. And on this auspicious occasion of celebrating the National Public Health Week, it is very important, to emphasize on the challenges that rural African Americans that are living in rural America are facing. And that is what this presentation is trying to focus on. Another key statistics that I discovered in the course of while preparing for this presentation is another studies by the Medicaid population, which shows that the mortality of Medicaid population found that those who live predominantly in Black or African American communities suffered greater risk of premature death from particle pollution than those who live in communities that are predominantly white. And as you can see in this in this particular figure that I have here, you can see that the Black community, that is the African Americans, are the ones that are mostly negatively impacted by all these pollutions. And African Americans tend to live, because of their cultural heritage, because of their history, they tend to live where there is greater exposure to air pollution, because they are closer to the indigenous people, so therefore they live where there is greater exposure to air pollution. And a 2016 study of New Jersey residents found that the risk of dying early from long-term exposure to particle pollution was higher in communities with larger African American populations, lower home values, and lower median income. Again, this validates what exactly I'm trying to talk about. How African Americans are suffering from the devastating effects of these pollutions, especially or particularly human-caused climate change effects that has that has caused a downward slope in the health and cultural heritage of African Americans living in rural area. Again, I still went further to check to actually find out what other statistics validate this claim. And I also discovered that even from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, that an estimated 70% of the country's contaminated waste sites are located near low-income housing, and Associated Press analysis suggests 2 million people live within a mile of the 327 Superfund sites, and are vulnerable to climate change flooding, most of them in low-income communities and communities of color. Again, this speaks to what exactly I'm trying to describe in this presentation, that African Americans are bearing the highest and maximum brunt of the pollutions, the actions, human actions, which has contributed to a lot of downward slope, just like I mentioned earlier, in their health, with respect to their health indicator. Another thing, from my presentation here, is that the Southeast, particularly North Carolina and Virginia, is notorious for its coal ash deposits, spills, and anti-regulation mentality. People of color have outsized exposure to coal ash pollution, which contains carcinogens like mercury, lead, and arsenic. And that the EPA, that is the United States Environmental Protection Agency, estimates that 1.5 million people of color live in areas vulnerable to contamination. Again, this is quite devastating, and it is mind-boggling to know that quite a number of people, quite a number of African Americans are still being affected even till date. So a study that I found out between the year 1990 and 2019 shows that an estimated 103,700 lives were cut short due to air exposure, although there has been some level of improvement, and thanks to people of color, to African Americans, notable people that have risen, to campaign for and canvass for environmental justice. So this figure has reduced and had fallen to 60,200 as at the year 2019. Again, this speaks volume about what the people have, the actions that the African Americans have started to take in order to stem the tide of this ugly menace. Now, bringing it home, there are three key things that I want to drive this presentation towards. The first thing is that African American communities in the United States are more likely to breathe in polluted air. And as you can see, in this image, you can see that a child that is playing in front of a public housing project which borders on oil refinery in Westport, Texas, shows the smoke that is actually coming up or coming out from the plants that are behind him. And this speaks volume to the kind of hair that such a child of families, Black families, rural African Americans living in that axis and living in those communities are actually experiencing, communities of color breathing 40% more polluted air than white communities across the US, according to the NACCP's 2012 cold-blooded study, and this speaks volume to what I'm talking about. This speaks volume to exactly what's to the tenets of this presentation. And another key point is that African American communities in the United States are more likely to live near coal plants, because of their settlement, and history. Of course, they are, very much likely to live near coal plants. And, living near coal plants, it actually has a lot of effect. A startling 68% of African Americans live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant, compared to 56%, of whites. This zone is where residents breathe the most resultant pollutants, which can cause a range of health problems, from heart attacks to birth defects to asthma, and quite a number of other killing diseases, states NACCP. Of course, there has been a lot of, this is a population of people that cannot be brushed aside, because we've had quite a number of contributions from African Americans to the economy of the United States. And suffering this kind of setback is something that is not helping. Like some African Americans have actually been contributors, inventors. According to history, they've invented the mail bus was invented by an African American. The traffic light in 1922, the automatic gear shift in 1932 were invented by Africans. So these same people now living near coal plants, of course, it's disappointing, and it's not encouraging. You understand? Another key point I actually want to emphasize is that African American communities in the United States are more likely to live near toxic sites, including those housing waste from fossil fuel infrastructure. As you can see, this is a Pittsburgh Post Gazette. This is an example of an African American community, and you can see the smoke that are coming up. Of course, this is a serious pollutant, polluting the air that these people, the African American living in this axis, are breathing in. And for a very good example is some years back, I think in the year 2010, when a BP underwater oil well got burst in the Gulf of Mexico. It leaked a mind-boggling 94 to 184 million gallons of oil into Gulf. These are these are things that are really affecting the health, both the health and the culture, of African Americans. And you trust me, African Americans, of course, every human use water. With water, we do quite a number of things with that has to, that has to do with water. And natural resources, natural habitats are also being affected by all these climate change induced human-induced climate change that are happening and are seriously affecting, African Americans, not only their health, but also their cultural heritage. Now, as this slide shows that climate change can be a culture killer, because, there's no planet B, according to the placard you can see here that this lady is holding. There is no planet B. We have just one planet. And on this auspicious day of the National Public Health Week, it is very important to reiterate, while African American deserves to live a healthier life, African Americans, particularly those living in rural communities, they constitute a very important factor if we really want to have a healthier community, equitable and healthy community. And that is why this presentation is very pivotal to the theme of this year's celebration. Climate change can be a culture killer for some tribes as well, because the loss of culturally important species on which traditional knowledge depends will make it more difficult for elders to practice and pass their knowledge onto future generations. Note Parker and Grossman. Again, you can, of course, Parker and Grossman are actually speaking to how climate change has affected the culture of African Americans. You know, quite a number of species, quite a number of both plants and animals that are supposed to be passed on from one generation to the other. You know, for one important reason or the other, for one important activity or the other, are not really being able to, they are, a lot of them are dying, and the species are not regenerating because of the human-induced climate change actions, which, you know, has to be stemmed in the tide if we really want to make, you know, a headway. And another key thing is that climate change shifts and disrupts plants and animal habitats, and in doing so forces cultures to adapt to these conditions or die. Yes, in the corporate world, of course, I've heard times without number that innovate or die, but I don't think that should apply to, you know, our communities, to our social relationship. You know, it shouldn't apply whereby we are now saying that either you adapt or you die. No, humans deserve better. This is not just about profit and loss or profit making. It's about, you know, contributing to healthy living. It's about preserving the culture of humans. It's about preserving the culture, preserving the health of African Americans living in rural communities. It's about preserving the people, a people that are contributing immensely to the economic and you know, social development of a country like the United States. So therefore, it is very important to protect and preserve their cultural heritage. And that's why, you know, this presentation is very pivotal. So what are my recommendations, you know, as I bring it home, because it is very important to drive home my points and ensure just to, you know, describe what needs to be done. You understand? Because African American culture is affected because as a result of all these human-induced climate change actions, you know, there are increasing fire and increasing flood, desertification, and ocean water acidification. Ocean water acidification has killed thousands of people, and therefore there is a need to ensure that, you know, we nip this in the bud before it, you know, escalates further. And that's why this on this National Public Health Week, it is very important to note this and ensure that we work on it. So what are my recommendations? Then my number one recommendation is that if companies are not held responsible for the pollution they cause, and the government does not act to protect all citizens, we may have several crises to choose from. If we don't already have several crises to choose from. You know, we've witnessed a lot of, you know, brain damage in little children or infants, you know, as a result of mercury poisoning, lead poisoning, arsenic poisoning, and all these are affecting children. And, you know, it is on record that, you know, African Americans living in rural America does not have access to, you know, modern health amenities compared to, you know, people living in urban areas. So therefore, governments and companies must take responsibility. You know, we must have, you know, even though people are losing interest, you know, in the fact that we no longer have as much responsible government as before, we must, since we are still, you know, working with government, we must keep advocating and canvassing that government needs to do what would help, what would make sure, what would make this the menace of these pollutants or these pollutions to go down, so that we can have a cleaner and clearer environment. Of course, climate change is affecting everything that has to do. It's not only limited to the cultural heritage of African Americans, even everywhere globally. It's a global menace that all hands must join together, whether governments or individuals, you know, private organizations, or even not-for-profit. Everybody needs to come together and speak with one voice and one action in order to make sure that, you know, we have a cleaner and better society for everyone. While suffering disproportionately from the climate crisis, communities of color are also leading the way toward change that works for all. Yeah, this gladdens my heart, because of course African Americans are not just sitting back because they are really affected. Of course, you know, they take the bull by the horn. And one of the during the class I had today, you know, I was, my faculty, well, my lecturer was talking to us about how, a case in Tennessee where the people in the community rose, to the challenge. Of course, African Americans are rising to the challenge, and, they are holding government and their representatives accountable. They are also holding companies accountable. And of course, we are seeing some, some improvement, even though the only room that cannot be filled in the world is the room for improvement. Therefore, a lot still has to be done by, when every stakeholders, every parties are held responsible, are held accountable, so that the development in terms of health, development in terms of cleaner environment, development in terms of cultural heritage preservation can transcend towards all rural African Americans. Another very key thing I also put in my recommendation is that government at all levels needs to be sincere with the people, and more grassroots movements, more grassroots movements and mobilization from people of color needs to take the center stage. As you can see in this image, of course, we are all we have. We need to come together, for there is power in unity, there is power in our diversity. Of course, we need to harness this power. We need to come together and push, people that we have saddled with the responsibilities of power, with the responsibility of leadership. They must be held accountable to ensure that the cultural heritage of African Americans are no longer eroded, are no longer, cleared off as a result of human-induced, pollutions or pollutants in the environment. Of course, we just have one planet and we have just one environment. We must come together as a people, and we must come together as a people. We must not be divided anymore along the lines of sexism or racism. Of course, it is not helping. It is not working. We need to come together as a people, unite together, because there is power in our diversity and there's power in our unity. So we need to harness this power to ensure that not just African Americans only, but every, Americans and all over the nations of the world from where this presentation has been seen, every human beings in every environment needs to be well protected. And that is why it has to take a center stage to achieve environmental and social justice, particularly for people of color. African Americans deserves, they deserve the best. African American deserves to be protected. Everyone, like I rightly said, needs to be protected. African Americans that are living close to, these pollutants more attention needs to be drawn to them, so that, the death rate, the mortality rate, can be reduced. Of course, when everyone is happy, when rural African Americans are happy, of course, the whole world, the whole of America and the whole world, is very happy. So government at all levels needs to be sincere with the people. We need more sincerity from the government. Yeah, it might sound like, yes, every time we say, oh, government must be sincere, government must be responsible. Yes, this is true. We cannot stop saying this, because we still need to keep holding our government accountable. We still need to keep holding, our representatives, our leaders, our senators, our, congressmen. We need to keep holding them responsible. Our parliamentarians, we need to keep holding them responsible until we achieve that which, we need to achieve, so that we can. Every African American deserves to live long. There's no reason why African Americans living in rural America should die prematurely, untimely. It's uncalled for. It doesn't add up. And there is so much you and I can do, and that is why this is a call to action to every policy makers. This is a call to action to every not-for-profit and for-profit organizations. That, of course, there is a need to be responsible in our actions, in terms of contributing to sustainability of the culture and health of African Americans. Together, we must come together. Together, we must, form an alliance to be able to, achieve this. And finally, I'm going to end with this quote by Dr. Robert D. Bullard, which says that, people are saying we have to make our communities more climate resilient, but it has to be a resilience that cuts across race, class, and geography. It has to be a resilience that cuts across race, class, geography, and culture. Let me add that. It has to be a race that cuts out. It has to be, a resilience that cuts across race, that cuts across class, that cuts across geography, that cuts across culture. We must ensure that, this resilience transcend whether it is no matter who you are, whether you're African American or you're Hispanic or you're Latino, whoever you are, we must ensure that we attain and achieve resilience that is not racially focused or sexually focused, but focuses on every every community that needs to be protected and developed. And with this, I believe that we can continue to protect our environment, not only our environment and communities, but the rural African Americans who has really been devastated the most, by the human-induced by the human-induced climate change agents or actions. And that is why this image or this picture is depicting that, of course, where, in what places we need to look at that. Why is equity? Of course, we need to look at the where, we need to look at the why. Of course, in ensuring resilience, it has to be a holistic approach. In order to achieve this, we have to talk about the where, we have to talk about the why, we have to talk about the whom, we have to talk about the what, we have to talk about the when and how. And if we talk of how and when, of course, the time is now. For the purpose and on this National Public Health Week of year 2023, it is very, very important that we take the health and culture of African Americans, particularly those living in rural America, very serious, because they've been marginalized enough. We cannot continue to, have a marginalized rural African American community and then expect development to be holistic and expect development to cut across. Of course, if we want development to cut across, we must ensure that every person, every race is taken care of. And I want to wish every public health workers out there. I want to celebrate each and every one of us, and I want to celebrate every student, every public health students, listening and watching. Yeah, congratulations to all of us. I'm happy taking part in the National Public Health Week, and I hope that we are all going to work together to keep protecting and campaigning and canvassing for solutions, solutions that are resilient enough, that cuts across, that does not know race, that does not know gender, but that is focused on making sure that development, healthy health equity, clean air, clean environment, greener environments or greener energy cuts across, all races of human endeavors. My name is Oluwole Ajayi. Once again, in case you want to reach me, I'm a student at Clark University studying international development with focus on climate change adaptation as well as health equity. You can reach me on my email address, which is olajayi@clarku.edu. Thank you to the organizer of this conference, and thank you to the CHPPD student section. I appreciate this privilege to be able to speak, and I hope that, of course, by the time we are meeting again next year, of course, there will be some indicators, higher indicators, better indicators to actually mark what we have been able to achieve within the space of the next 12 months. Thank you for having me, and do enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.